Phoenix, are you willing to be sponged out, erased, canceled, made nothing? Are you willing to be made nothing, dipped in oblivion? If not, you will never really change. The phoenix renews her youth only when she is burnt alive, burnt down to hot and flocculent ash. Then the small stirring of a new small bub in the nest, with strands of down like floating ash, shows that she is renewing her youth like the eagle, immortal bird. D.H. Lawrence. Welcome to the Poetry Oracle Podcast. I am sorry that I have not posted for a while. Been traveling, then at the New Mexico Men's Wellness Retreat, giving and receiving support from a great group of men. I completed a 1,600-mile trek by automobile in support of my friend and brother who wanted to return to Santa Fe. Brother E. Clayton West, who I talked about in my last podcast, is now a Santa Fe resident again. Today I post a poem sent to me by another friend and brother in India, also named Tim, who reminded me at a perfect time in my life, my favorite myth of all time, the Phoenix story. And it Phoenix tails nicely with the movie I mentioned before with Ram Dass, Becoming Nobody, which I again highly recommend. Dass and Lawrence remind me again the myth of death and rebirth, so powerful in human consciousness. And while it sometimes gets misinterpreted, like in Christianity and Islam, for example, where our rebirth is to occur in some heaven or hell after our death. When I read these myths and others very similar, I think Christ, Muhammad, Krishna, Zoroaster, and many others meant that we have deaths and rebirths in our lives, not after. In the Gospel according to Thomas, Christ was asked, "When will we see the kingdom of heaven?" Christ's answer in this version, "The kingdom of heaven is spread across the earth, and men do not see it." And for me, while the common human condition is to wonder what does happen to us after our physical bodies die, nobody has convinced me yet that answer. But I think Christ is saying that our heavens and our hells are right here in our lives. And I've been in both places. While careful with the word belief, I do believe that we all have a soul that is separate from the physical body. It witnesses our thinking, our emotions, and all the experiences of our physical body in the world. And it grows itself from that witnessing. Our soul knows inherently a great story, a beautiful song, a poem where words become feeling, ecstasy, grief, triumphs, and defeats. And its language is the only real energy in the world, the energy of love. 20 years ago next month, I found myself at the Parliament of World Religions with the Joseph Campbell Foundation. I met a Zulu warrior who told me of his tribal story, the forgetting tree. He said, "We say that your soul chooses what it wants to experience before it comes down into your body. But right before it comes down, it passes the forgetting tree and forgets what it chose." My soul loved this story so much that it has remained with me ever since. And on my good days, it is a lens I use to see each and every person in the world, including myself. We chose and are now living our choices, perhaps to grow our souls. This allows me to have compassion for every person in the world, no matter what they are doing within it. So maybe Donald Trump is in kindergarten, the Dalai Lama is getting his PhD, and I'm in fifth grade working on sixth. And this is where my compassion is challenged. Maybe I was a Trump a few lifetimes ago myself. And that does not mean to not stand up, acquiesce to the Trumps of the world, for that too grows the soul, standing up. The only thing left then, in my estimation, is to say yes to it all, as Joseph Campbell has said. I guess I sort of digressed a bit from the poem, or then again, maybe not. So to really change, grow my soul in Lawrence's poem and the Phoenix story, I have to be near consumed by fire, covered in ashes, become nobody, erased, canceled, burnt up. And then a spark is started that becomes a flaming eagle phoenix soaring out of the ashes into the sky. As I suggested in other poems in these podcasts, I have been in the ashes myself recently, awaiting the spark, and yet also fighting against that process, expecting fairness in the world, great health, and many other expectations that are not guaranteed to anyone in this world. I mean, ashes don't feel good. They're dirty, they're dark, and cold at times, and nobody should have to endure these conditions. And yet it is required for the soul's growth. Yesterday, I realized that there must be a complete surrendering into Lawrence's oblivion, trusting in some divine force that created everything, including this body and soul and its growth. And while I think I have more control than I really do in many things in my life, I do have some, and when ready, must act in the world in this physical body while also trusting in the divine force growing this soul. Otherwise, I remain in the stuckness ashes, fighting against what is my soul's destiny in its desire to grow, this time in this physical body. So I made a couple of decisions to move from my stuckness forward, while unsure, with fear for sure, forward in my life towards the next things I am to do in the world to grow my soul. And I think I am feeling a little spark today to accept the unfairness and ash work for as long as it is required, even if it goes in another direction that I can't even envision here, sitting here today. I am saying, admittedly, a shaky, vulnerable, unsure yes to the future, from the ashes of erased cancellation of whom I was before, taking a few important steps towards changing myself, and hoping I have been hollowed out enough for rebirth, soaring again one day, flames alight in my newest death rebirth in this life. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Until next time, may you also soar or be comfortable in the ashes of rebirth. About D.H. Lawrence. David Herbert Lawrence, born in 1885 and died in 1930, was an English writer and poet. His collected works represent, among other things, an extended reflection upon the dehumanizing effects of modernity and industrialization. Some of the issues Lawrence explores are sexuality, emotional health, vitality, spontaneity, and instinct. Lawrence's opinions earned him many enemies, and he endured official persecution, censorship, and misrepresentation of his creative work throughout the second half of his life, much of which he spent in a voluntary exile he called his savage pilgrimage. He traveled the world in exile, finally arriving in Taos, New Mexico in 1924, where he said, quote, "I want to gather together about 20 souls and sail away from this world of war and squalor and found a little colony where there shall be no money, but a sort of communism as far as necessaries of life go, and some real decency. A place where one can live simply, apart from this civilization, with a few other people who are also at peace and happy and live and understand and be free. With Mabel Dodge Lujan, a prominent socialite, they acquired the 160-acre Kiowa Ranch, now called the D.H. Lawrence Ranch, in 1924 from Dodge Lujan in exchange for the manuscript of Sons and Lovers. He stayed in New Mexico for 2 years with extended visits to Lake Chapala and Oaxaca in Mexico. While Lawrence was in New Mexico, he was visited by Aldous Huxley, among others. However, in 1925, he suffered a near-fatal attack of malaria and tuberculosis while on a third visit to Mexico. Although he eventually recovered, the diagnosis of his condition obliged him to return once again to Europe. He was dangerously ill, and the poor health limited his ability to travel for the remainder of his life. He made his home in a villa in northern Italy, living near Florence, where he wrote The Virgin and the Gypsy and the various versions of Lady Chatterley's Lover. After being discharged from a sanatorium, he died in 1930 at age 45 in Venice, France, from complications of tuberculosis. Frida Weekly, his wife, commissioned an elaborate headstone for his grave, bearing a mosaic of his adopted emblem of the phoenix, my favorite myth story of death and rebirth, and which has a worldwide significance in many cultures. He is buried at the D.H. Lawrence Ranch in Taos. At the time of his death, his public reputation was that of a pornographer who had wasted his considerable talents. We can see that posthumously he transcended that moniker and is now one of the greatest writers of his time.